Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast exploring sex, relationships, and liberation. I'm your host, Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
On today's episode, we have Juan-Carlos Pérez-Cortés. Join us for a conversation about the revolutionary power of building a loving community. Together we talk about hierarchy versus preferences, the stomach ache of Anarchy, and rewriting the narratives of love. Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to Modern Anarchy. I am so delighted to have all of you pleasure activists from around the world tuning in for another episode each Wednesday. My name is Nicole. I am a sex and relationship psychotherapist with training in psychedelic integration therapy, and I am also the founder of the Pleasure Practice, supporting individuals in crafting expansive sex lives and intimate relationships. Dear listener, oh wow, I have so much gratitude to be here. So much gratitude to be expanding on my dissertation research, and just so much gratitude to have a space where I can talk to all of you about such profound and life-changing ideas like relationship anarchy. I see this practice as a really big frame shift to see the beauty of all of our relationships, to see the freedom to craft our relationships outside of these systems, outside of the ways that they are deep within our unconscious and our culture. And so, what a joy to have Juan-Carlos. Oh my gosh. I mean, his book, Relationship Anarchy, dear listener, if you've not read it, I highly recommend doing a deep dive there. I was reading his book after I had published my dissertation, and there were so many crossovers, and it's so validating to have a physical form to these concepts and these ideas. And I remember reading his book and just feeling so seen, and like this thing that I'm practicing is actually real, a real movement and phenomenon. So I hope you feel that when you read his work. I hope you feel that when you read my dissertation, which is on my website and available for free if you want to nerd out in 200 pages of clinical psychology research on relationship anarchy. And with every conversation that we have in this space, I hope you feel and know that there are pleasure activists around the world practicing relationship anarchy. And you, dear listener, you are a part of that movement. All right, dear listener, if you are ready to liberate your pleasure, you can explore my offerings and resources at modernanarchypodcast.com, linked in the show notes below. And I want to say the biggest thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. You are supporting the long-term sustainability of the podcast, keeping this content free and accessible to all people, so thank you. If you want to join the Patreon community, get exclusive access into my research and personal exploration, then you can head on over to patreon.com/modernanarchypodcast, also linked in the show notes below. And with that, dear listener, please know that I am sending you all my love, and let's tune in to today's episode. So my first question is, how would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Well, hello. Thank you for having me here. Well, I'm Juan Carlos Pérez-Cortés. In Spain, we have two surnames, Pérez from the father, Cortés from the mother, and I always try to use both because of the mother is obviously as important as the father, at least.
Right.
So I have been studying and living in the non-monogamous collectives or communities for, I don't know, 15 years. In the last 5 or 6 years, we don't like, or at least I don't like to say non-monogamy communities, but non-normative communities. So that changed a little bit here in Spain. I live in Valencia. We have a good. It's the third city of Spain, and we have a quite large community of
Cool.
people who likes or who identifies or who lives in a relationship anarchy way. I wrote a book, Relationship Anarchy, Occupy Intimacy, that was translated into several languages. English is the last one. So, and I'm very happy that I had a lot of feedback from many people, who is very nice. The feedback is always very moving and nice. Yes, and that's all more or less. I could speak more about me, but I don't think it's it's the idea.
Sure. Eventually, part of it's all the personal and the political, right? And
Yes.
yeah, it's such a joy to have you on here. I was already feeling emotional just thinking about this conversation because having your book out there, it's real. There's some level of going through this practice, you read the blog, you hear people talking about it, but there's something so tangible about having a book of all of these ideas. And for me, going through it, I was like, I'm not alone, there's other people doing this, and it felt so real to have a book on the topic.
hmm Yes, that was one of the motivations, no, for writing the book. Having something where you could go and know that a lot of things were just like fossilized in a way, no, like sedimented there, and you could just have that basis on top of which build things, and I don't know, it's something like that, something like so that's the reason why it has a lot of history. It has a lot of research on the origins of the movement, on the anarchist political anarchist movement and everything, because we wanted, or at least I wanted to have something, like you said, real or like a cornerstone.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And for me, as I was reading it, there was so much of it that paralleled my dissertation. So I felt like, I did something right, which was really enjoyable. And I'm curious to ask you the really big general question of, for you, what does relationship anarchy mean?
Uh-huh. Well, it's to describe something so large, so big. It's like difficult, but I think it's a way of seeing life, because relationships are so important in life. The relationship framework changed completely. Not only what you do, also what you see. How do you interpret the world and everything? So for me, it's like a framework. I like to say that it's a framework. It's not a set of recipes. It's nothing like that. It's just a frame full of options, of possibilities, and with very little prohibitions, no? Or how to say, things that are forbidden.
Yeah, instead of it being like a prescription of this is what you do,
Exactly.
A, B, C,
Exactly.
D, it's, from my understanding, a whole paradigm shift, which you could
hmm
unpack that for a whole lifetime, but a paradigm shift that is examining power structures and how those have impacted our ability to love and intimacy and what it means to build relationships. And so that paradigm shift of continually examining that, there's no
hmm
ABC on how to do that, right? It's not prescriptive in that way. So hence why anarchy is often, described in what it's not. It is not this, it is not that, it is
Yes.
not this, right?
Yes. In fact, the original title in Spanish is relationship anarchy, a revolution from the bonds, or from the links, or from the relationships. No? From, not off, which is something. It's usually a good way to start, because most of the people that present me in talks and in conferences and so on, they read the book fast, read the title fast, and they say revolution of the bonds. And I always, it's a good way, a good place to start, because I say it's usual that this confession is not of the bonds, but from. I mean, a revolution that will change the world, if could change the world, because if you change how you relate, then the whole world could start to go somewhere else, no? Because the typical bubbles that we build when we relate in a conventional way structure the world, the whole world, in a very definite direction. Mm-hmm.
Right. And not all cultures do this, but particularly in my context in America, the majority of people live in nuclear families,
Mm-hmm.
two-parent, household of right? Just thinking about a whole different world of a different community purely on just how we'd structure housing, like bare minimum housing, right? Like it's a whole different world when you start to think about what sort of ripples could come from this large paradigm shift of liberation.
Exactly. Yes. In a podcast in Spain, some months ago, somebody said that the best, and that was very, for me, it was very interesting. The best example that she could think of a relationship anarchy was, I don't know if you remember, because it's an old show, but it was the Golden Girls. You know that? It's a series of the 80s that were five girls with more than 60 years old. So girls was like
Sure.
a joke. Do you remember? It was very famous at that time. And that was exactly the opposite to a nuclear family. And because there were a lot of adventures, they had a lot of things, but they never, I mean, they never, of course, they never broke that plot, because it was the basis of the series, obviously.
Yeah.
But that's for me, that's similar to what we have in reality when we have normativity, that we cannot go out from the framework for the amatonormative or hegemonic framework, because that's how it works. And when you are watching a TV series, you know that the way it works is that they will not change, because if they change the format, the series goes. It's not thinkable. So,
Yeah.
in that context, your expectation is that they will not build a conventional family, for example. They will remain there. So
Mm-hmm.
your expectation is that, and in reality, your expectation is that people will build nuclear families. Your
Okay.
friends, whatever, you never think they will be like in your network forever, because they will probably
Right.
yes, build
Mm-hmm.
build families, build nuclear bubbles.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And I love talking about media as examples of these stories, right? Because currently we're lacking frameworks of this
Mhm.
narrative of what it means to live outside of the romance myth of you follow the relationship escalator and this means that you've made it in love and relationships. And I think that so many of us tune inside and say, what do I want? What do I want? Forgetting that what I want is so deeply shaped by my
Mhm.
culture. And until I
Mhm.
can see other narratives of what's possible, I'm gonna fall into the cultural meaning making that's around me. And so we so deeply need alternative stories of what is possible. Otherwise, we live in this framework of, I haven't made it yet because I don't have the wedding ring. I haven't made it yet because I don't have the house with the kids or this, right? And so we really need other stories like that to provide an alternative of what's possible to even dream of.
Exactly, because the something that you don't know they are imposing, it's
Yes.
difficult to rebel against,
Yeah.
no? Because you are not aware that you are being I don't know, there's something that you should do, but you think you are choosing it, huh?
Yes.
And that's interesting in the personal realm. And for example, in non-monogamy, consensual non-monogamy spaces, they talk about a lot about that. But most of the times only in regard to dyadic relationships. I mean, on personal, I mean, your well-being, things like that, no? But it's also very interesting the systemic dimension, no? The more collective dimension of that, no? Because it's obviously it's nice to be able to see that you are being subject to a number of mandates, no? But it's also very interesting to go further and see what that means for the whole structure of your community, of your society, of the world. Finally, and that's so important. And it's also very interesting when you change something that is not usually there in the polyamorous or non-monogamy communities, when you start to think that the solutions are not in the way you relate, but most solutions come from the network. That's very interesting, because when you read books, for example, about attachment, or when you read books about relationship styles and so on, the solutions are always, you should be like you should have compassion, you should be non-violent communication, you should do non-violent communication, you should do this or that. But they never say, go to your network, and maybe most of the solutions are there.
Yeah.
Are not changing you or trying to change the other person. Is just being aware, but that both are aware in the end of the network, because there is the huge potential that we forget often.
Sure. I mean, yeah, the field of psychology is so white and individualistic when you go back to it,
Exactly.
right? It's like,
Exactly.
you need to work on it, you need to do this,
Exactly.
not, oh, step into your community and actually have these needs met in multiple people and pass that.
Mhm.
It's always back into the individual. So you're right, even in
Exactly.
the non-monogamy frame, it goes back to the individual do your work, not hey, these systems are impacting you. Just so you know, like
Exactly.
these systems are making it hard to actually do
Mhm.
any of that, right? So I think that larger community focus as well as that larger systemic focus is really needed in these conversations because these systems are not set up to support us right now with this sort of style of relating.
Exactly. That's so important that it's not usually thought in that way, because we live in a system, in a context where we see everything as something that we should improve ourselves. It's like do something more efforts and things like that. And even when we talk about how to relate to others, we talk with concepts that come from our context, like agreements. Or it's like the agreements, contracts. I don't know. It's transactions in the end, because our system, our living capitalism is all the time talking about
Yeah.
transactions, about agreements. So I prefer, for example, in that sense, I prefer to speak about compromise, about what I want, what I can do for the others, for the network, and what do I need from the network? What's the limits I can? The
Yeah.
limits are personal for sure, because the limits are something very important, and shouldn't it's not the same as other things. The limits are like safety in the end and things like that. So it's important to work very carefully with them. But the rest, what I can do, what they can do, that's something that if you look from the point of, if you don't look at it from the point of view of capitalism, of agreements, of transactions, instead look at you as provider to the network, and of compromises, of things that you can do. So the other persons individually are also can also go into that more holistic concept instead of thinking about how will we fix this. It's not to you and me. It's let's look around. Let's look at all of us.
Yeah. Could you imagine? I'm just thinking about couples therapy paradigms of like, we're working on the couple, we're working on the couple versus
Exactly.
no, let's work on the whole community. Let's talk about
Exactly.
that, not just the dynamics you're having between the two of you, but what's going on outside of all of this. I think that's kind of how, even in a monogamous framework, like starting to see how all of our relationships are in such a deep network of community. And until we get that perspective, we're going to keep suffering, just trying to figure out in these dyads here. There's so much more to that. And I'd be curious too, in your own life, what has it meant for you to practice relationship anarchy?
Well, I think I started like most people at that time, from a very simple, very basic needs of finding new options, different from the classical way to relate. And in the beginning, it was like very basic. I mean, our in fact, the inspiration came from the USA, Difficult Slut, Difficult
Yeah,
Slut, which,
yes.
which was the first text in the at the beginning of, I mean, 15 years ago, maybe, or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
arrived to us, and from there I like to remember that a lot of people went into the same through the same paths because we found the same roadblocks, the same problems, and it's interesting because sometimes when you follow the same path as other people, you feel like you are not so crazy. You
Yeah.
are a little bit like there's something rational about what you are doing.
Mm-hmm.
In that time, well, I was just like following those ideas of
Yeah.
non-exclusivity, of trying to avoid the jealousy and things like that. And then we started to build networks to leave the labels of couple, non-couple, just friend, couple, or whatever. We just started to build something we call links or bonds. I don't know, in Spanish we say vínculos, which is a word that we try to use, which is not always the case, but we try to use as an alternative to relationship, because
Mm,
relationship sounds like romantic relationship. Even if
sure.
you don't say romantic, if you say I'm in a relationship with,
Right.
people understand that it's like a romantic relationship. And we try to use another word, but sometimes we finally we end saying this is my bond when it's romantic, and my
Hmm.
friend when it's not. So it's difficult
Sure.
because it's always difficult to, and um, and that's what we are trying to do. And yes, for me, it's very, very interesting. In my personal life, I have been. I feel like, I don't know. I feel I learned a lot by trying and being successful in not affecting my bonds, keeping everybody free of being affected by new experiences or new things. I mean, because usually when you find a new person who moves you a lot,
Mm-mm.
I mean, your previous
Yeah.
bonds suffer and so on. I think I learned a lot from fighting that possibility. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I was quite successful, and I have very, very long-term bonds who
Yeah.
changed a lot, who went this way, the other way, but we're never affected, or as much as possible,
Yeah. Yeah.
we're by my new things, or my new
Yeah.
relationship energies and things like
Right.
that. And that's a very, very interesting. You really feel proud when you are able to keep that what you think, to keep it in the real life. And I think I've been able to do it with a lot of dedication.
Yeah, a lot of hard work, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I imagine that when I had recorded with Jessica Fern, we had talked about new relationship energy as like a psychedelic experience of its own, right? And so you would hope that the more times you take that drug and that intense experience, the more you know how to notice the landscape of where your brain's going, right? So that you don't negatively impact all of your relationships. Of course, they're going to be affected as you bring more people in, but not hopefully negatively. We'd hope it would bring more of that life force and that energy to you and then spread out to the people around you. And so the lived experience of practicing that. And I think particularly, I would imagine in your life, it's gotten easier than from the beginning. Most of us, if you're growing up in the paradigms of what's considered normal, quote unquote, it's monogamy, a restricted, very focused energy into the dyad. And so the second that you get out of that, you're like someone who's been held in a certain level. I don't want to use negative words, but you've been restricted to a certain level. And so when you get out, you start running. You're like, oh my God, new relationship here, right? And it takes a few times, to kind of like ride that and be like, okay, we don't need to have that anymore. Now that I've rode that ride a few times, I feel a little more grounded, right?
It's the fear of missing out, no? But with people instead of of events.
Which happens from restriction, right? Again, if you tell
Yes,
the kid you cannot have the cookie in the jar, you cannot have it, you cannot have it, they never get to have
yes,
it. When they do, they're
yes,
going to get a stomachache because they're going to eat on it
exactly.
and gorge so much,
Yes, yes, yes. In this case, you give a stomach ache to many people, which is worse.
Exactly. Yeah. Hard to say. But I imagine too, it's starting out many years ago without a lot of examples of this. I
Hmm.
imagine, I mean, I think when we look historically, there are examples
Hmm.
of this, right? But in our modern day context, I'm sure it was
Hmm.
difficult to kind of unpack these paradigms. I've struggled with this a ton myself to really see a different world. So I'm sure there was a lot of grinding of the gears to really see a new paradigm.
Yes, yes, it was interesting
Yeah, yeah.
because because the old paradigms or the old examples or the classical examples of the
Hmm.
last decades or the last century, the 60s, or for example the hippies in
Right.
the 60s, things like that, were were not good examples, in fact, because they lacked a number of basic elements that we have now, like feminism, for example, like the intersectionality. I mean,
Right.
power relationship, power structures.
Hmm.
We have the queer theory that
Yeah.
is all the time like. Doing a criticism of essentialism, of that we are different, things like that. A lot of tools that help us now that they didn't have before, and so the examples were not really so good. So
Yeah.
we were like confused at the beginning. Fortunately, feminism was, at least in my context, was very prevalent in these new communities. The people had a very strong gender perspective.
Hmm.
So and also other power structures, or like I mean racialization, poor. I mean the structure of riches and poor, and also of xenophobia, things like that,
Right.
were in our fights in a way. Here it was exactly at the same time as in USA. I think it was Occupy Wall Street.
Mm.
At that time here it was the something that came from France. It was like indignados, which means like I don't know. In English, but it was like very similar to it was like occupy the parliament in this case, things like that, no? That
Hmm.
were like very powerful popular movements. Also in the north of Africa, it was the Arab Spring, things like that. A lot of movement in at the beginning of the second decade of the 20th century, I mean last decade, the beginning of last decade, and that was very useful because we had a lot of intersectionality ideas in on feminism and the queer theory. I mean, also it was very important that the fight that the LGBT plus fight had reached high levels of success with a lot of tools that they used, like appropriation of words, like normalization, like visibilization, things like that, that were our inspiration in this case, at least here. But I guess it's the same in the USA. And finally, we found that those ideas from the north of Europe, these people from Stockholm, Andy Norgren, etc., and they were a huge inspiration because here we were speaking about also about anarchism in terms that were not the classical political anarchism. We were talking about anti-globalization. We were talking about, for example, animalism, the vegan fight as well, anti-globalization as well, as I said, things like ecologism. All those are like inheriting a lot of aspects from anarchism, but with a different, with a more focused and more lifestyle implications.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really exciting to stand on the shoulders of giants. When I look back to, just 100 years ago, I think about Margaret Sanger being arrested for talking about contraception,
Exactly.
let alone, any other liberation of the women's movement since the 70s that has occurred, let alone the queer movement. So for me to come into this space as a queer woman and talk about any of this, I deeply hold all of the lineage that it's taken to even get to this point, and then get really excited about the future generations, right? Like we're having this conversation. I can't even imagine in another 50 years where our collective is going to be running as we're kind of, sitting at the forefront of these conversations and really asking these questions. I mean, God, they're going to pick up the torch and run in ways that we could never even imagine.
Sure, yes. It's a very interesting and that's something that we couldn't predict. We thought we were only like exploring new options for our private life, and a lot of things came together to go much further than we could imagine at that time.
Right, I know. And I've gotten some people who question, oh, well, they tried that in the 60s. What makes you think it's more prevalent now? And I mean, the internet, it changed everything. You don't have to have a hippie friend to introduce you to the community. You can now go and listen to a podcast. You can listen to so many different things. And so it's spreading at such a radical rate now that we have something like the internet, let alone even the internet to keep more bonds and connections, right, in more expansive ways now than, when you had a pen pal and you could write a letter every once, like now you can FaceTime a Comet partner or a long distance partner. I mean, the way that we are relating is just so radically changed by the internet now.
Yes. That's a huge tool that we can use for emancipation, and then some people can use to avoid it. So it's like a fight again.
Absolutely. I'm curious, what do you think people get wrong about relationship anarchy, the misconceptions?
A lot of things. One of the most prevalent is probably, they ask me a lot, that they cannot, it's difficult for them to avoid hierarchies in the sense of avoid that one person, I like much more this person for, I don't know, for intimacy, this person for the cinema, I don't know, for whatever, no? It's difficult for me to balance all this, and I always say, no, you don't have to balance anything. I mean,
Right.
you could, of course, you could like one person, or you could want to spend 100 times more time with one person than with the other. You don't have to balance that. The only hierarchy that is like a little bit out of the context is the hierarchy related to authority. The other hierarchies are not really hierarchies, are preferences, are like the energy you have, or the uh, that's fine. Don't try to balance anything. Don't try to restrict your desires, to control your desires in the sense of balancing everything. No. Authority is the only thing that you should is not a good word in this context, but
Yeah.
that it will be not in this framework if you give more authority to one person than the other.
Yeah.
That's the only hierarchy that anarchism is talking about. It's not talking about anything else, like, I don't know, intimacy, or I don't know, any other attribute that you feel, or emotion that you feel, or no, it's only authority. What has to be that anarchism has to do with. Mhm. That's one of the things that
Yeah.
I think. And the other another one is when they say that is very similar to polyamory, for example,
Mm.
because I always answer that in some axis of description is basically the opposite, because instead of building larger bubbles, the idea here is to avoid bubbles. So it's like one option is like making the typical nuclear family larger, and the idea here is to punch that bubble and say, no, we are networks, and the network have no clear borders. Of course, there are people who you are not interested in, and they are out of your network, or very, very marginally in your network. But and other people think that are not differentiating between network and a community. I mean, you don't have to live or to have any presence of all the network together. It's not about making, which is fine. I mean, it's great if you have for example, a co-living or a community that you share a lot of presential things. No, I mean, factual things together. But the idea here is to build networks that from the bottom of the society up, no?
Yeah.
And they don't have to be like all together at the same time, or have
Mm-hmm.
projects together. It's not like the old hippie,
Yeah.
I don't know in English, communes or something like that.
Yeah.
No, the word, and which is perfect, which is nice, which is there's nothing against that, but it's not necessary. You
Right.
can build networks in a very different way, because
Yeah.
it's perfect to do this or that. Both things are, but
Mm-hmm.
the basic idea is to build networks that permeate the society,
Right.
and changing that way. It's just changing the shape of our relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking about the binary of its monogamy or non-monogamy, right? You're either
Mhm.
monogamous or you're non-monogamous. And that binary is inherently based on the question of romantic and sexual exclusivity. And I
Exactly.
feel like relationship anarchists say, well, what if we don't put that as the center stone of defining our whole relationship life? Like let's
Exactly.
take that out. And then
Hmm.
I think when you are a relationship anarchist, maybe you do want to have sex with one person and you practice sexual fidelity, right?
Hmm.
Great.
With no person.
Yeah, or celibacy, right?
Asexual, yes.
Yeah, or asexual.
Asexuals are one of the collective that contributed with more
Yeah.
with a incredible insight
Mm-hmm.
into these concepts, because
Yeah.
they are incredibly oppressed by amatonormativity.
Yeah.
It's they cannot have deep relationships if a relationship always entails one or more, I mean, poly or not poly, people sharing all of the attributes of amatonormativity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Absolutely. It's
yes.
completely.
And
Go ahead.
yes, sorry. No,
No, go ahead.
no, it's because you said the word romantic. I used to use it a lot, but it's also interesting to think that maybe we are, I don't know in English, leaving that word. I mean, abandoning that word,
Yeah,
giving up that
sure.
word, and maybe we should reappropriate it. I mean, one a friend here that wrote one of the best books about polyamory here in Spain. I think it's also translated, but I don't know if to
Okay.
English.
Yeah.
She speaks about. I mean, she said, no, romantic is nice. Romantic is
Yeah.
candles. Romantic is flowers. Romantic is
Yeah.
caring of each other. I don't know. It's music.
Mhm.
It's nice. Don't let's keep it for us. Don't give up that word. And they say that instead of romantic, she speaks about Disney relationships. So,
Mm,
so what we don't want is Disney, because Disney is
right.
like the paradigm of the normativity. No, you talked at the beginning about media.
Yeah.
Disney made
Right.
the idea of many of us, no, built the
Hmm.
idea of how it
Yeah.
works. Hmm. So it's also important to think if we want to give up the word romantic, or we should keep using it.
Yeah, I definitely do. I just don't draw the lines of whether I'm doing it with someone I'm having sex with or not, right? Like this is
Hmm.
something I do with many people. You're right, like these acts of adoration, right? And that doesn't
Hmm.
have to be defined about who I'm sleeping with, right? So all
Exactly.
of that, seeing that in a more expansive way, I think gives me hope because I am such a romantic and I've always loved that, right? Who doesn't love
Exactly.
getting flowers? Who doesn't love getting that handwritten note? It's the expansiveness of doing that with your whole community, right? And I really appreciated what you had named about the hierarchy of authority. Oof.
Hmm.
This is such an important conversation because I think when I was first starting in relationship anarchy, that was something that I was so confused about, where I was like, okay, I give 25% here, 25 here, 25. How do I do the math? And it doesn't, you can't do it like that. And even if
Exactly.
you did, like think about your whole community, right? A functioning community, in my thought, apparently, would be that you have some relationships that you see more commonly, some you maybe see only in a community space, some you
Hmm.
see even more in longevity of years, like a full community. And if you
Hmm.
tried to math all of that equal, you couldn't
Hmm. No,
possibly.
people that are away, for example, as well.
Mm,
You can have bonds that are
yeah.
far away, and they are
Mhm.
so important anyway. It's something that is very interesting is that we know how to do it because we have the concept of
Right.
friendship, and we know
Right.
we do it well with friends.
Yes.
We do it well. We don't have to learn something new. We have just to avoid
I know.
having avoid having that Disney thing occupying a place that the friendships cannot invade. I mean, on the top. I mean, those Disney romantic or whatever relationships. I mean, classical relationships, couple
Yeah.
relationships, are occupying a place and are avoiding that the rest of our real network that we already have goes that high. That high. It's the place that I mean we could learn in the end to give to what now we call friendship all the power that we are giving to what now we call couple.
Yep.
That would be a very simple way to change a lot of things,
Yeah.
because we know how to do it.
Right.
We know how to relate to friends.
I know.
But we put that like limits, we put boundaries, because this is friendship, this is not this is that. No, let's forget about prescriptive labels, boundaries, and let's build the networks with all the potential that we now only give to the couple.
Absolutely. I know. I've always tried to fall back on, okay, how do I do this in my friendships? And then that being, a clear sort of example, right? I have
Exactly.
a complex smattering of different friendships that I see in different amounts of intensity, different amounts of emotional intimacy. But I don't look at my friendships and say, you can't have any others. This is how I find security, is by that control. No, I find security in who I am and the relationship that we've built. And so it's so clear there. And then this is why I talk about sex all the time, because somewhere in the milieu of what sex means, we have such deep cultural scripts and narratives of what it means to do that with someone, and expectations. It is deep. And I mean, I think when we look back to historically, sex being this act that, prior to contraception would give life. You can just imagine the spiritual, religious frameworks that started around this deeply important thing. But now we're still trying to get out of, sex doesn't have to be about life. Sex can be about pleasure, right? All these different ways. And so, but we still have such deep cultural scripts, particularly around religions that have colonized the world, let's be clear, because there were other religious structures that weren't as, mono couple focused. But so we're deconstructing the ways that those colonizer religions have impacted all of us. And in that, it's like classical conditioning. It's so deep in my body and my soul. And so every day I'm having to unpack the ways that exists in ways I don't even recognize.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I agree completely, because that's what we all feel inside that conditioning and that construction of us as beings, as human beings. We have to really deconstruct, in the sense, the word deconstruction is usually used in a very light way. Deconstruction is something very difficult. It's the telling apart what's our self and what's what we learned, which is 90.9999%.
Yeah, totally.
And that's a very hard exercise, but very interesting exercise as well.
Right. Yeah, and as a therapist, if I'm working with a woman who's older, right, I do have to hold the cultural context if she says, oh, I can't make this decision without going to my husband first, in ways where if I'm working with a teenager who's a woman, or growing up into her womanhood, she might say, what? Of course I'm going to make this decision on my own, but I have to hold that cultural context of the paradigm, right? And same thing for queerness, right? Another example of liberation. Someone much older has gone through paradigms of such deep restriction. And so the idea of being queer is so much more difficult to even tap into. When we look at the data, the amount of people who are identifying queer now that are young, it is blowing up, okay?
Exactly.
And so when I talk to someone who's much older, they say, I couldn't even fathom. There's no way. That's so wrong, right? But then you look at people who are young and who are just thriving into this because of all the liberation work that is done. They're not even going through the same levels of shame and difficulty. And so I think this is another level of this here, right? Where we are unpacking this right now of what it means to unpack this classical conditioning and the shame. But again, future generations are going to be running into this space at our age and going, why were you guys struggling? And we'll be like, you didn't understand. It wasn't cool back then.
Yes, that's the future is going to be so different. I envy a lot.
No, I know.
The teenagers now, that they have they can do things so differently. Yes,
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
Hmm.
And for me too, in terms of like the hierarchy, I've been loving talking about my network as orbits, like a
Hmm.
solar system, right? And holding the complexity of, yeah, some planets orbit me at a much closer rate. So maybe this is the closest orbiting partner I have that I talk to every
Hmm.
day, or and then I have another partner maybe I see every other day, and then these other partners that
Hmm.
orbit at a much wider rate, and then holding the nuance of that orbit and the gravity that it can have on me and my life
Hmm.
in a way that understands the importance of that, right? Like there's different gravity based on those planets of how far out they go. But there's not a hierarchy of authority, right? Where this one planet gets power over
Exactly.
the other. But the reality is I do see this person more often,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, and the equations are probably equally difficult. The gravity and
Yeah.
the orbits.
I gotta talk to a physicist. Someone come
So,
come talk to me.
yeah, and the three body problem, no? with, with
Yeah.
those chaotic, and there's a very beautiful, I think, concept that I like a lot. It's comet relationships.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
That they come and go, and you never know when they will be back for a while, for a few days
Mhm.
or whatever. And that's like a very romantic concept, in fact,
Mhm.
in the
Absolutely.
sense,
Historically,
it's
yep.
exactly historically.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that that's
Mhm.
part of the journey as people who are in this space, like the creating of language to describe
Mhm.
this, right? Until we have language to describe, which I know we do so clearly with friendships. So I think going there is a great example, but creating more language for us to be able to describe the worlds that we're building, that changes our
Mhm.
whole psychological process of what we can dream. And so, even like that word compersion, right? All these
Mhm.
different ways that we're grasping for new language to describe this. Again, I think that is also going to move the movement forward. The more we can have language to describe these various things.
Mhm. Yes, 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 yes. That's important, and it's also a collective thing, and
Right.
also trans-collective in the sense that we borrow a lot of words
Right.
from feminism, from the queer fight, or the rights, the LGBT rights fight, even from the trans revolution as well, no?
Mm-hmm.
The and from other places also, like for example globalization, things like that. We borrow a lot of words, and we there's an exchange in those fights, which are very very interesting. And for example, from the black feminism of the 60s or 70s 80s, we got a lot of concepts. It's very important as well to understand that this shouldn't be, I think, a thought that is built by individual
Right.
contributions. It's very, very, very collective as well. We learn like talking like now. We learn by meeting,
Mm-hmm.
and those meetings that in fact, one of the most interesting parts of this is the how we build. These tools of meeting I mean, it's very nice. I want to go to for example to the USA, to some of those meetings you
Yeah.
have there. That's something I want to do, and
Mm-hmm.
because in Europe we have probably different style, but it's very interesting
Yeah.
to know. Yes. Hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah, I did my dissertation with qualitative interviews, so I was getting data from multiple relationship anarchists, and then I've now taken that format onto the podcast where it's an open
Hmm.
call to anybody in the world who wants to
Hmm.
come in and have that conversation, and then being able to release those out into the world. It's been so transformative for me because, I had an
Hmm.
idea of relationship anarchy, and then I sit and we co-collaborate like we're
Hmm.
doing here, and then we continue to move this collective movement together that has no end, right? There's no end to dismantling the
Yes,
ways these
yes,
systems have impacted our
yes.
power, our ability to access pleasure. I know that we'll die one day still unpacking this question as a collective. And so it's been so exciting to have this sort of space where I could bring people on, or to have conferences, like you're saying, where you can really pick up the conversation in a collective to define
Hmm.
what relationship
Yes.
anarchy means.
Yes, 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 yes. I was in Chile last the other month. I mean,
Hmm.
in the last year, and it was also very interesting with people coming from all over the world.
Yeah,
It's very interesting. It's difficult because it's far the distances,
sure. Yeah.
but it's very nice.
Hmm.
By the way, there's something that I always say that I don't know if it's quite. There's consensus about that, but I never use the word because you used it, and it's something I never use is the word relationship anarchist. I
Mm.
mean, because in some way, I think it's like using relationship anarchy as an identity. It can be interesting, like all identities can be interesting as an emancipatory tool. I
Yeah.
mean, if we need to build a relationship anarchist identity, like a political subject
Right.
to ask for rights or to fight for rights, things like that, obviously it's interesting, it's important. If you don't have a label, you don't have the way to to ask for things, to fight for things. But in the end, it's a label, and it's a label in the sense of identity. And I think identity is difficult to mix with the ideas of relationship anarchy.
Mm.
So because it's always like I'm this and you are not this, and I think it closes a little bit. So I always try to. It's a little bit longer, but when they ask me, I say no, I'm not a relationship anarchist because I don't like the
Mm.
label.
Yeah.
I like relationship anarchy, or I practice,
Yeah.
or try to or see it as utopian horizons,
Mm.
things like that. No, where
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a little bit longer, but it's something that for me it's it's like I'm rebel against that sense of identity,
Mm.
maybe it's more because of personal experiences. When somebody tells me I'm a relationship anarchist, it's a red flag for me. Not exactly a red flag because
Sure.
sometimes it's just
Yeah.
a way of speaking, of talking, nothing else. But
Sure.
sometimes when it's said in a very almost authoritative way,
Mm. Yeah.
yeah, it's for
Hmm.
me it's like no, it's like I don't know, Rick. It looks like false. No? It's
Sure.
that
Yeah.
sentence. I don't know. But it's not something that I'm. It's just probably a red flag that I have in my, because identity it's always against something. I
Mm.
mean, if you are relationship anarchist, it's because some people are not.
Right.
I don't know if I want to be in giving identity cards for relationship anarchists,
Sure.
or or
Sure.
belts of colors, no. Like
Right.
yellow belt.
Yeah. Hard to
Yeah.
say. How do you balance that with this question of, if you're a relationship anarchist, then there's someone who's not, when that is true. Like, there are people who believe that I should have one lover and that's the most important thing in my life, and that's
Mhm.
where I'm going to spend all my resources and do that. So I think that's interesting. Like, the bifurcation does exist in some ways. So I'm curious, how do
Mhm.
you how do you balance that reality with that value choice that you were just speaking to?
Yeah, it's true that if you want to differentiate, but maybe one of the main strengths of relationship anarchy is trying to avoid those that labeling, that binary, that dichotomy,
Right,
those
right,
dichotomies.
right.
But of course you're right, and sometimes if you really want to demand something or to explain something very clearly, or
Yeah.
when it's needed. I think obviously it's legitimate,
Yeah.
but it's like something that I just don't like. It happened also with the queer
Mm.
fight, with the fights of for the rights of gay men, for example. In the end, at some point, it's changing now, but at some point, the gay identity was so strong that even bisexual people were discriminated.
Right.
It's like going to the extreme of
Yeah.
identity,
Yeah.
pride for identity,
Sure.
and that was very important, a very good tool, very interesting tool, and it was part of the fight, very. But and in the end, when you if it remains there as a
Right.
so strong
Yeah.
trait, then it can turn against you. No? It's
Totally.
like
Totally.
we are this tribe, and you
Yeah.
are not.
Right.
Something
Right.
like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think when
It's
I
like a sect, no? A sect, they say
totally.
in English.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. Or yeah, totally. And I think when I meet people in my personal life, I don't start off with like, "Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm a relationship anarchist," because that feels kind of weird, right? Like I would hope
Yeah,
that you see that in how I interact with you and the way that I construct my world rather than having to
exactly.
name it. And when I talk about relationship anarchy or being a relationship anarchist, I want it to be as expansive as the definition of dismantling power structures. So again, if that
Hmm.
means you practice monogamy and sexual fidelity, you're here. If that means you're
Hmm.
asexual, you're here. If that means you practice polyamory, you're here. It's about whether you're
Hmm.
taking that critical lens to the power structures. And like we started the conversation out with, there's no prescriptive way to do that. And so
Hmm.
then the expansiveness of we all can be here in all of our different ways.
Exactly, exactly.
And so living
Because
into that. Yeah.
yes, because people sometimes demand that
Yes.
you explain what's your relationship with somebody. Are you a couple? And you say, I mean, they sometimes it's very like very demanding. They want to know if they find you with somebody else somewhere in a party or whatever, they want to know if you are a couple or not, and they are not satisfied with any explanation that is not 1 hour long. so, so it's the same. I don't want to say I'm a relationship anarchist as a label. If
Hmm.
they want to know, they have to take a coffee with me with 2 hours at
Right.
least, and they,
Right.
and they will know how I relate,
Exactly.
how is my network, and so on.
Hmm.
I resist to answering with 1 word or 2 words, because with friends it's the same. What are you? We are not anything. We are good people. That's all.
Right,
That's
right,
what we
right,
are.
right. I'm a human being. Is that enough for you?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes, that's so important. And I've definitely met relationship anarchists, right, who use that label and then say, I have no commitments, no one has power over
Exactly.
me. And then I say,
Yes.
wow, okay. Those two words mean very different things to you and I, and
Exactly.
that's
Exactly.
different journeys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure, sure. Yeah, commitment is something where I said before, I think I used the word compromise, which is
Mm,
in Spanish is compromiso, but in
mhm,
English is commitment.
mm,
It's I used the wrong word in English. It's commitment. I mean, relationship anarchy is based on commitment, and people think it's not commitment. So it's completely the opposite.
yeah.
It happens also with political anarchism. People think that
Right.
political that anarchism is like disorder, when an anarchist society or group or whatever is the highest expression of order, because it's an order that is not based on authority. So it's the most difficult way to reach
Yeah.
uh, what's called order, in the sense of doing things well,
Right.
surviving,
Right.
and being happy,
Yep.
successful, etc. So it needs a kind of commitment that is so complex and important, and in this case it's the same. Commitment is the basis, and people think it's the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it takes hours of conversation is
Yes,
usually
yes,
what it is, right? When you have
yes,
that
yes.
whole when you get off the relationship escalator, when you're no longer going on these patterns, we're now looking at a blank canvas. It's no longer the paint by
Yes.
numbers, clear outline, color in the lines. We have a blank canvas of how we're going to relate. And so it takes time to
Hmm.
co-create that canvas, that art structure, that beautiful love of romance with multiple
Exactly.
people, right? And so,
Hmm.
yes, there's so much commitment in that and so much conversation and dare I
Yes.
say emotional maturity. Like in terms
Yes.
of relationship structures, this takes a lot to do with high
Exactly.
levels of these
Yes.
skills. That was one of the deepest
Exactly.
things I think I want to pin into the field of psychology that has such judgment in terms of attachment towards anything that's not the normative paradigm of monogamy. It's like, have you seen the level of conversation and insight it takes to do anything else?
Exactly.
It's
And
intense.
they say immature to that,
Right.
which is completely the opposite.
I know it breaks my heart. And I think going through the field myself, I remember one professor who specifically told me non-monogamy never works, right? Let alone relationship anarchy, but non-monogamy never works. I always
Mhm.
see it like this and people forgetting the bias of their therapy room. People are coming to
Mhm.
the therapy room with struggles. You're not seeing the polyamorous couple, the polyamorous family that's having a beautiful community event together. They're not showing up in your therapy office, doctor,
Of
blah,
course,
blah,
of
blah.
course.
So your perspective is so warped, you don't even
So
think about it.
biased. Yes,
Yes.
yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
It's true. It's true. It's awful
Yeah, it is
when they say
awful.
that,
It
and
was.
when they say that you are in a phase. I always think that I should answer that I'm not in a phase. I'm just living. Maybe you are in a phase with your wife or with your husband, because
Yeah.
probabilistically, I mean, you are in a
Totally.
phase more clearly.
Totally. Totally.
Statistically,
Statistically,
it's
yeah, 50% of those are going to be a phase that
exactly,
ends, right?
exactly.
That's pure science. Yeah. I know. I know. And in that my political activism is staying in my pleasure, right? I say what
Hmm.
I do and people, "Ah, that's crazy. How do you do?" I'm just doing
Hmm.
my thing. You know what? If my joy makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should examine that for yourself. I
That's
don't
good.
care what you do. I'm gonna keep having fun over here. So just please leave
Yes.
me alone.
Yeah, yeah. We should tattoo something like happiness is revolutionary.
It is
That's a
pleasure.
very that's a great
Yeah.
sentence.
Absolutely. My pleasure is my activism. And that
Exactly.
reminds me of queer activism too, of like what it means to live
Mhm.
into the pleasure when the
Yes,
paradigms have been so negative, right? And the pain,
exactly.
which is
Yeah.
real. And it is hard to do these relationship structures, but to also
Hmm.
trust that your pleasure is radical, your pleasure is
Hmm.
changing the paradigm when people see you thriving in your expansive orbits and your comet partners and all these people, it makes people uncomfortable. And
Hmm.
good. I hope they
Yeah.
examine where that resonates for themselves and where it makes them feel uncomfortable because that's a long journey ahead, you know?
That's
Yeah.
great. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
hmm I want you to take a moment to connect with your younger self when you were first hearing about relationship anarchy and starting to connect with this value system. I'd be curious what words of wisdom you would share with your younger self.
That's interesting. Uh, well, I would say that something like go on. You are on the right
Yes.
you are on the right path.
Yes.
Don't hurry up, because it's not something for a day.
Right.
It's just it's just a matter of digging and digging and digging, but you are on the right path. And then also don't look. I mean, look around. Look to the other people. Try to go in your way, because context is important, but not far from the others. I mean, keeping eye contact with your network, and with a very very wide network of
Yeah.
people and never think that you are going to discover anything by yourself.
Yeah.
It's a collective endeavor, and but keep going. Don't stop because you are on the right path. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That certainly resonates for me. You know, at the beginning, you're like, is this right? I don't know. I don't know. And then you keep going deeper and deeper into the paradigm and saying, yes, yes. And
And read a
uh,
lot, no? Read
yeah,
a
read a
lot.
lot. Yes, read a lot, get in community, right? It's the community,
Mhm.
the culture, again, that shapes our paradigms of what's possible, who we are, identity, all of that is shaped by our cultural context. So then being intentional about surrounding yourself with people who are in the same paradigm, right? So that you can dream and have different possibilities there. And one of my therapists, you know, a client had mentioned that they wanted to practice non-monogamy when it felt easier. I know, and I was like, that's a really interesting way. I mean, a good metaphor for me I was thinking about is like saying, "Oh, I want to run the marathon when it's easier." Like, okay, it's gonna get easier, but when you first start with
Mhm.
that walk and then that
Yeah.
1 mile jog and then that 10 mile and you keep going, you
Yes,
know, and
yes.
that also means don't run when you have a broken foot.
Mm.
Don't run when you
Yes.
know you have the flu, right? If you're in a dynamic in your relationships and it's already chaotic, you know, the
Yes.
complexities of that. But these
Mhm.
paradigms of non-monogamy and relationship anarchy, like it takes active discomfort, like starting that
Mhm.
first mile of the marathon, right? But once you've been running it, the more you get
Mhm.
there, the more that you have that lung capacity to start breathing into it and enjoying it. But God, that first mile is intense when you first
Yes.
start running.
Yes, yes, it's going to be. But it's true that now, for example, I see that it's easier
Yes.
because for some people, I always make the joke, like saying very bad words to them, like when they say, no, 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 I only build relationships with people already in the community, no?
Mhm.
And I say, son of
Yeah.
whatever. Now you have people in the community, but what happened? But when we were there, there was no community.
Right.
You had to build relationships with people because there was no community. So
Yeah.
now you are very lucky. You don't know how lucky you are now that you can say that, which I don't know if I agree with or not. I mean, maybe it's good also to try to build relationship with people independently of if they already are
Right.
now or not. I don't know. Maybe it's easier. Of course, it's easier with people that already know what's going
Yeah.
on, the words.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
read some things, and that's easier.
Right.
I don't know if it's good to keep that endogamy. I don't know, but you are so lucky. You don't know how lucky you are that
Yeah.
you can say that. You couldn't say that before because there was no community.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've enjoyed having like a balance. Like I have enough of a
Mhm,
community that is here so that I feel seen and held,
mhm,
and also other relationship or other friends and other relationships
mhm,
that practice different orientations because
mhm.
diversity is helpful to get outside of the
Exactly.
echo chamber of your one way of looking at the
Yes.
world or even my family, my mom is Mormon, right? So like even more in a
Hmm.
religious structure. And so I always get a lot of perspective in that relationship of my
Yeah.
practice of relationship anarchy. And I think that
Hmm.
that's really important to not lose sight of the diversity of ways that people do this.
Yeah. And even expand the relationships to non-human things like work,
Yes.
like studies,
Yeah.
like your PhD or whatever.
Hmm.
It's
Yep.
it's another relationship. You sometimes you give
Yes.
authority to things,
Yes.
and that's something that you should at least recognize, at least
Yeah.
put in the same context,
Yeah.
because it's authority in the end.
Yeah, I don't practice hierarchy of authority, but I've certainly joked that this podcast is my primary partner. If I have one, it's this podcast.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
It's your
Hmm.
primary. Yeah,
It
yes,
is
I
my
understand.
primary. it will get put first.
It's good to have a so diverse primary, it's like a
Mhm.
luxury.
Yeah, exactly. It's been a joy. It's been such a joy.
Yes, yes.
Well, I want to take a deep breath with you and then check in to see if there's anything else that you wanted to share with the listeners. Otherwise, I can guide us towards a closing question.
Mhm. Well, no, I think this was like very, very interesting.
Yeah,
We touched a lot of different aspects, and
totally.
I was like very, very comfortable.
Good. I'm so glad. I'm so happy to hear that for you and for us to have made this really special conversation for the movement.
Hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well, the final question that I ask every guest on the show is, what is one thing that you wish other people knew was more normal?
Mm, that it's normal to value all relationships as we used to value the what we have been taught that is the most valuable thing, the partner in life. I wish that everybody was taught that it's normal to have all our relationships occupy that height.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yes, absolutely. It breaks my heart when I hear people talk about being single. I'm
Hmm.
single. I'm single. As if they have no other meaningful relationships. The idea of oneness, like I'm completely alone, right? And the ways that that sort of narrative and perspective shapes your whole paradigm that you see the world through. I'm actually single and lonely, right? I'm single and so sad versus, wow, maybe I don't have quote unquote that one person. Again, this is all in that paradigm, right? But you have all these other relationships. Oh
Exactly.
my God.
Yeah, it breaks my heart as well when people say she or he is only a friend.
Yeah.
That only, it's absolutely, mm, I don't understand it.
Yeah. Because the other side is feeling the fullness of what that can mean in your life. It's like, the saturation of the color. Only a friend is this like dull orange compared to the like full saturation. I have this beautiful human, right? Like
Exactly.
it's so different. And I think that you feel way more fullness of the relationships and the love that is around you in that paradigm. And I am all here for what sort of pleasure that can bring when you have that level of intentionality to all of your relationships, including relationships to
Hmm.
the earth, right? Relationships to animals, like this deeper intentionality to all of this. I do think there's more fullness in your
Hmm.
life when you're living in that paradigm.
Exactly. I would like people to find normal that we care of each other as much as we are taught to care about a particular person.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Care is so important, and we need it so much. We
Yeah.
forget how much we need it when we are fine and everything is. But
Right.
when we need it so much.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm excited to see what future
Hmm.
generations are going to do with the groundwork we're laying.
Hmm. Sure,
Yeah.
it will be great to see.
Hmm. Well, it's been such a joy to have you on the podcast today. I really appreciate you coming on here and having this conversation with me.
Thank you very much. I was encantado. He estado encantado.
Lovely. Thank you. I'm curious for all the listeners who have really enjoyed your perspectives and everything you shared here, where can they find your book to dive into more of your
Mhm.
content?
Yes, well, if you look for relationship anarchy book.com,
Yeah,
I made that website
smart.
to,
Smart.
to put everything there because now
Yeah,
I also have an audiobook and
cool.
translations to different languages. People are translating it to
Mm,
Portuguese, to German, to
yes.
French, to different languages. So everything is in relationshipanarchybook.com.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
If you enjoyed today's episode, then leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. And head on over to modernanarchypodcast.com to get resources and learn more about all the things we talked about on today's episode. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all next week.